Excellent. Good morning, Chris. How are you doing, guy?
Terrific, Arrow. How are you?
Fantastic. Looking forward to talking with you because this is every bit the reason why I created the iHeartRadio channel, View from the Writing Instrument, to get people to share their stories. Oh, my God.
Perfect. Thank you.
For you to take this journey, I mean, come on, Chris, you know what it's like. You look at someone, you say, you've got to tell your story. I don't feel like it, or I'm not in the mood. What am I going to write? They're going to judge me. How do you get beyond those?
You've got to, that's a good question. And a lot of people do have that anxiety up front. At a certain point, I think it takes, once you can write one story down and get through that one little process, that's usually, for people that have apprehension about it, to me, that's usually the changing moment. Is first you make a list of integral moments in someone's life, and you write one of those stories, and all of a sudden it doesn't seem that tough because you're not writing a book per se. You're just going story by story by story. Some can be long, some can be short. But I think once you begin to reflect and review your life, that becomes an exhilarating process. And so all anxiety, or at least a lot of it, tends to fade away just throughout the process because you're reliving past glories. You're re-meeting old ghosts, and there's something about that, even if it's painful sometimes, that is very life-affirming and really helps you make sense of where you've been and ultimately where you're going.
The importance of what you're sharing with people and showing people the way is the fact that I have nothing from my mother and father or my grandparents, but I do have 30 years of daily writing. So I thought I'm going to end this by making sure that I write. So families need to understand this is an important tool about life.
I agree. I don't think this is all about publishing. There are people that obviously want to have their book out there. They want to sell books. That's fine. But I think the art of storytelling, to me, it's the oldest practiced human art going back to cave drawings 15,000 years ago, where we had to share, as human beings, share what we did that day and what the conflict was and how we got through it. And that to me is what's so valuable. And that's why, to your point, oral histories with families, so we can create a living record of just how humanity functioned and how we got through stuff. Because no matter, the next thousands, tens of thousands of years, the one constant thread will be people getting through stuff. There's always going to be conflict. Every day is going to have some degree of conflict. And storytelling to me is like the ultimate cure for that, or at least way to coping mechanism for getting through conflict is showing, a good piece of writing, I think, reminds any reader that you're not alone, that somebody knows what you're going through. And that's what's so key, especially when it comes to families and family legacies and the characters and what they got through, because then it'll let you know what, I can endure. I can get through things because 100 years ago, my Uncle Scott did this when he opened his haberdasher on the corner, whatever it happens to be. The stories matter. And so, but then there's people that want to see themselves in a bookstore. That's great. That's an unbelievable goal to shoot for. And I try and accommodate everything in the book, whatever your writing goal is. I try and address as much as I can in a very comprehensive manner.
You talk about that coping. That is so important because I'll tell you what, in the daily writing that I have, I talk about what it was like to be in radio during the 9/11. I mean, because there are broadcasters out there that have no clue what we went through during 9/11, and as well as the COVID lockdown, Chris. And it's things like this that really will inspire.
Well, that's key what you just said, because the word memoir, which I use a lot in the book, it's French for memory. When people write a memoir, that's not an autobiography. An autobiography is your entire life, which, let's face it, unless you're a well-known personality, most people aren't going to read autobiographies unless you're some sort of actor, athlete, some big personality. But memoir is different because memoir focuses on very specific experiences that are not so broad-based, but very specific. And that's where anybody can write a compelling memoir. In your case, you're talking about COVID and 9/11. That's great memoir topic because there are people born today that will never know what that's like. Yep. what I mean? And so that's a good example.
One of the greatest things that you've got with this book, Where One Ear Hears the Rain, is the fact that having that book, David Duchovny on his podcast recently said that he's reading a book that was 50 years old. He says those books still have energy in them. Can you imagine someone's memoir?
Well, that's the key. I mean, a good story never loses its magic. You know what I mean? It really doesn't. I read books from the 1700s, 1800s. And if it's well told, if there are compelling characters and some nice dialogue and great conflict, I mean, that's what storytelling is. And I've got lots of different prompts and stories and things within the book to help anybody get there. I don't consider myself a fancy writer on any level, and I want this book to appeal to somebody that's never put pen to paper, to someone who's been published many times, and everyone in between. That to me was key, was to not deny anybody the opportunity to at least take a shot at telling their story.
You said three of my favorite words: pen to paper. I love my writing instruments. How can we get people to use the writing instrument and not necessarily speak into their phone?
Well, listen, we're in a transitional state in terms of communication, and I'm not going to judge it because I'm guilty sometimes. If I have a thought, I'll record it. But I do I am totally married to my yellow legal pads and my number 2 pencils and pens and all that as well. Not so much for writing as much as rough sketching story ideas and outlines and lists and things like that. But my attitude is, look, whatever mode that you use to communicate, to put things down in some kind of permanent or at least semi-permanent basis, it's cool. You know, just when you do it, be as descriptive as you can. Think about the reader. Are you making them feel like they are with you? If you're at a ball game, do they feel like they're sitting next to you at the ball game? I mean, I think really strong writing in this kind of narrative sense, it's pretty basic. It's being very descriptive and very immersive and using your 5 senses. And again, I go into a lot of this stuff in the book while sharing stories of having worked with people like John Oates, like the Doobie Brothers, where I described their process and what we went through together to get them to a point where they could tell their stories effectively.
Yeah, because they are telling stories in 3.5 minutes, and now you've got to get a book out of them? Oh, my God, what a challenge, Chris.
Well, but that's a good point. But what you do, especially in the case of talking about music, is what got them to those 3 minutes. I mean, I remember Pat Simmons telling me about writing the song Black Water, and how he described his whole day that day in New Orleans of hopping on a streetcar, taking his laundry to a downtown laundromat. The Doobies had a day off, and just how the day unfolded. And all of a sudden, Black Water isn't just a 3-minute song anymore. It's this beautiful day spent in New Orleans that, you know, and so when you hear this song again, hopefully if you've read the book, you think of it on a different level.
So do you believe in the theory that Mark Twain did? Put it in your own accent. In other words, don't try to be somebody, be yourself on that page, and who cares if it's written wrong?
I do agree with that. I mean, look, you don't want to be sloppy, and I think, and I'm hardly a grammarian, but I do think the capturing your unique literary footprint is very important. And people tend sometimes to over polish and make it fancy or perfect, and that's not what it's about. Think about, I was equated, there's a whole chapter in the book about why it's like cooking. Everyone in a kitchen, you give anybody the same ingredients, they can make the same meal, but in a different way. They're gonna mix up the amounts they use based on their taste. And writing is like that too. You know, we can all retell the same story, but we're gonna do it in our own way, with our own words and our own attitude. And that's what really matters, is making sure you're authentic to yourself when you write it.
The writing disciplines of putting a memoir together, is it okay to contact family and friends? Because sometimes their interpretation of a relationship can be completely different.
It's critical. I always think that, you know, wherever possible, offering alternate perspectives is a great way to unpack a story. Because, look, I always use an example in a writing workshop that I do. If we all walked out and saw a car accident, God forbid, depending on how we write about it would depend on where we were standing. And if you were you were on the other side, Arrow, and I didn't see what you saw, it doesn't mean your truth is wrong. It means you saw it differently. And it would be important to talk to you about what you saw. I could put it in my own words with your permission, but getting different perspectives is a wonderful way to actually build accuracy, which matters, and, you know, and complete parts of it that we just weren't privy to.
Don't you think the average person just doesn't understand how interesting they really are until they start asking themselves questions?
Yeah, I think most people are modest, when it comes to looking at their life and not wanting to sort of beat their chest over things. But I think what I've watched happen for more than 10 years now in classes and workshops, especially, those are the people, the ones that are very reticent up front to thinking they're interesting or anything like that. They're the ones that will find a couple of key stories in their life that other people will say to them, that's amazing. How can you not share that? And they'll get encouragement. I love watching that happen in a room. And they'll realize that, yeah, we've all got instances and experiences we've had that really are unique to us. We may not think about it in those terms, but once people start reacting to it, we recognize that, yes, we were lucky to go through certain things that were specific, that were unique, that are worth sharing with other people. The readers, in this case, can learn from those things.
As that leader and that instructor, how do you face that wall when someone says, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Am I doing it right? What do you think? What do you think? Because I don't want to discourage anybody, because and so what I try to do is I get them to talk to me. Tell me what you think of what's going on.
I think that's smart. I do a similar thing. I often find myself adopting what I think would probably be the role of a therapist, almost, where you're listening, you're being an active listener, and you're trying to guide them toward those points that really matter. In terms of critique, you've got to offer some kind of critique, obviously. You don't want to be Pollyanna about everything, but I think gentle critique, when people are opening their hearts up, you got to be careful because they're in a more vulnerable state at that point. And so you want to critique gently, focus on positives, obviously. But then if something's not working from a narrative standpoint, help them with organization, help them maybe look for better ways to describe something. One of the key factors in the book is showing and not telling. So don't say it's cold outside. Show the reader it's cold outside. Show the breath in the air. Show the icicles. You know what I mean? A lot of it's that. I often find myself in gentle critique mode, looking for showing and not telling opportunities.
What about poetry? Because there's a lot of people that write in a very poetic way, and I always call that hidden speak. They write in their own language, and when a reader comes by, it's like, I don't get it.
It's funny you ask that, because lately I'm no poet by any stretch, but in the last 6 weeks, I have found myself writing poems, and it's taught me a lot. It's as a result of having met somebody. And I never really scratched that literary itch before. I'd always kind of wanted to, and I had tinkered a bit, but it really made me realize, and again, there's a little bit this in the book as well, on how important a muse can be to inspire you sometimes, where maybe you didn't consider yourself a poet, maybe you're not a poet, but you can still give it a good try, and you can work at it if somebody inspires you. And I think looking for personal inspirations in terms of storytelling, poetry, any kind of verbal representation is a good thing. We're surrounded by people that affect us. As I talk about in the book, let them affect you. Be open to the idea that someone's presence can help you create and can help you do things you never thought about doing before.
How do you get someone to be open enough to go into the buried dirt and or the crowded cave? Because, I mean, there's so much in there that needs to be shared.
That's a great question. For me, it's about the simple point of that the best way to get through your pain or the fear is to confront it head on. And we all pack away stories in our head for so long because we're scared of them. But when you confront them and you get them down on paper and you deal with them, that to me is how you wrestle away the control, and you begin controlling the pain rather than let the demons controlling you. I think confronting it in story form is a very healthy way to do it. It's not easy all the time, but I think it's the best way to confront things.
What you're doing with this book is amazing in the way that you are giving forward is what you're doing. Is this something that John Cheever opened the door for you to do?
Absolutely. I mean, what really strikes me is when I first went to see him when I was about 12,
wow.
He was like an old man. He struck me. Here's this old writer in this beautiful colonial home behind this old, this antique desk. And I did the math when the book was, when I was wrapping it up, and I thought, I'm his age right now that he was when I first saw him. He was 62. And I thought, wow, what an interesting thing. This is where I'm at in life. And I thought about where he was at in life. And yeah, he definitely, I mean, I watched him with other people and I knew he taught a lot. And so, yeah, I answer everybody who reaches out pretty much as I can. I think it's important. And I try and spend as much time in teaching sessions and giving as much as he can, because I know how hard the process can be. But I've also had other great teachers who they don't know they're teachers. Mm-hmm. Plenty of students in my world, which you may have experienced as well. They show you the way by opening up in ways you've never seen before. Working with co-write, collaborative things like John Oates and the Doobie Brothers and Dave Mason, they've taught me, because here are these people I grew up massive fans of, and yet they're letting me into their world and they're sharing their legacy stories. So I learned from others watching them go through their process. And I address that in the book, that oftentimes the best teachers are the students.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially with these musicians, because I've been with both of those guys, Hall & Oates and the Doobie Brothers. And the thing is, the thing that I've always learned about them is that the process of writing is receiving. And I think sometimes when people are putting down their memories, they're forgetting to receive it. They feel like, well, I got to talk about this. I got to talk this. You got to receive it first.
Exactly. And you have to go through that first phase of, I got to talk about this. Yeah. But oftentimes the better stuff, the really relevant storytelling elements are not the obvious. It's what's behind the obvious 2 or 3 layers in. And that's the patient process of getting people to comb through those layers and really, as a whole story about John Oates, because I've got stories in the book about what it's like to work with those people and what our defining moments were. And John and I had a moment in a hotel where, I was on the road with Hall & Oates, because John and I worked a lot when he was traveling, and the promoter had sent this beautiful, like they always did, like a 5-foot basket of fruit, and it was covered in cellophane. And we were early in the process, and I said to John, you know what? I got to be honest, that cellophane kind of makes me think of where we are at right now. I said, you're telling me good stories, but you're not letting me really get to the fruit. And I think we have to sort of proverbially remove the cellophane in your storytelling to get to the heart of things. And that resonated with him. And from that moment on, he was a lot more open, and it developed into a very deep friendship as well as a collaborative writing partnership. And I thought, you know what, that's the kind of lesson. So I tell that story in the book about being in that hotel, because I want people to be with me through those instances and really know what it's like to work with these people.
One of the things, and I'm excited to hear what your answer is going to be, one of the things about being a writer or to share your memories like this is the fact that you get emotional. Don't be afraid of the different shades that you're going to go into. How do you deal with that?
You don't. You let it happen.
Yes.
When we've had hundreds of people shedding tears when they get up and read stories in classes, and they'll be hesitant, and by that point, the group will encourage them and say, no, that just means it's like you've struck gold. When something is that moving, that it pushes you to that point, it means you've gotten to the stuff that really matters. So don't deal with it. Let it happen. Feel things, let things resonate, let it go. And you'll feel lighter afterwards. It may be hard at certain points while you're doing it, but I think it's a very cathartic process. And there's a whole little subchapter in the book called, Is It Okay to Cry? It's so funny you said that. And I unpacked that whole thing of why I don't think it's okay. I think it's actually, it's useful. It's important to do it. It's important to get to that point as much as you can.
This book and what you're doing with writers is so important, because Barnes & Noble isn't letting we writers in there to talk to people anymore. It's just the invitation is not there. So listeners need to understand that you are extending your experience to them so they can learn.
That's all I wanted to do. Honestly, I really thought if I never wrote another book, at least I could say that I took a shot for the person that sits at home that's always told, yeah, you should tell your story. You should write a book. Or somebody that just thinks about their grandparents and maybe capturing their story. It didn't matter to me what people's motives or goals were. I just wanted to create a space within the 2 book covers, where people could open it almost anywhere and get something out of it that's tangible, that's relevant, that's inspiring, that helps them get to this point where they feel like sharing. That's that simple for me.
Do you have a nickname for your writing? Because and this is going to sound dark, but I call it bleeding ink. I got to go bleed some ink right now.
Well, it's funny because there's a Hemingway quote in the book where it's basically said, writing isn't that big of a deal. You just sit at a typewriter and bleed. I mean, which I always love. Um, no, we quit. I've called it
Yeah,
storytellers for
yeah.
10 years just because I couldn't think of anything else. It just sort of became that, my writing groups. Um, and it's really just that. I mean, again, I should brand it at some point, but now that I've got where one hears the rain, that to me is sort of
Oh
a
my
nice
God.
envelope because that's from a John Cheever quote where he basically said, a great piece of prose, a great page of prose is where one hears the rain, one hears the sound of battle, just basically describing good descriptive writing and why that matters.
Wow. Where can people go to find out more, Chris? Because you're reaching beyond just the pages of a book here.
Well, the book is everywhere that you can get books. I mean, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. It's got great distribution through Simon and Schuster. I'm very proud of that. There's, of course, a Kindle version. I'll be cutting an audio version soon.
Nice.
So it's wherever you find books. It's easy to find. It's available now, and again, I'm very excited about it. And again, even if you think you can't write, I think this book could prove you wrong because everybody can sit down, just like anybody can sing. Maybe not sing well at first, but you have to start somewhere. And that's what this book is all about. It's about a starting point, and then it's about a gradual process that hopefully will unleash your voice.
Wow. One of these days, Chris, after all these years, we got to get together face to face and not over the phone. We got to do a face to face sometime.
I would love that, Ara. Next time I'm back in your neck of the woods, back in beautiful North Carolina, we'll do that. Or similarly, if you're out here, just let me know.
I'll do it, man. You be brilliant today, okay?
You too, man. Thank you.